Well, there are two background elements that need to be considered. One is that this was an extremely professional hit. It was not just a drive-by shooting. There is likely to have been several teams involved, and they've probably been following Mr. Nemtsov to find an excellent location to do the hit. And one person comes up the stair onto the bridge, a snow removal vehicle drives up to block the cameras, and a getaway car suddenly pulls up and gets the killer. So this is very professional. The second is that it was done in a very high security area, very close up to the Kremlin walls, where there is lots of police, both plainclothes and security forces on location with cameras. So the fact that it was done there was intended to send a message to somebody. So that leaves the question of who sent that message in this professional fashion. The official Russian version is sort of the usual suspect. It's CIA agents aiming to compromise Mr. Putin, or it's Ukrainian fascists. And these versions are not very credible. Another version that is pretty extreme is that it was a hit ordered by Mr. Putin against a leader of the opposition. Mr. Nemtsov was no longer a threat to Mr. Putin, and Mr. Putin has been very careful in creating martyrs out of opposition leaders, so that is not very credible either. That then leaves what may have been more credible, namely that it was done by people out of the separatist movement in Ukraine that did not want Mr. Nemtsov to pursue what was happening there, or want to send a signal to Mr. Putin that there is no retreat from what happened. That's one very possible motive for the hit. Another, slightly less possible but more worrisome, is that somebody did this in order to send a signal to Putin that you may be on your way out, that somebody else may be wanting to take over. If that is true, then it's truly frightening, but that is not very likely. That's a tough one. The immediate, Mr. Nemtsov was part of a group that were planning to hold a big opposition rally that likely would not have gathered very many people. After he was killed, that rally was transformed into a mourning for Mr. Nemtsov that gathered maybe 50, maybe 70,000 people. So the first impression is that the opposition has not reacted by falling into despair, but by going onto the streets in very large numbers. And many people have been interviewed saying, my fear is now gone, it can't get any worse than this, so now we really have to stand up. So it is possible that this killing has galvanized the opposition and led them to renew their activities against Mr. Putin and to support remaining leaders like Mr. Navalny. But I'm not very optimistic that this is the case. It is true that Mr. Putin has now a martyr to face, which he really does not like very much. But it's one thing to go into the streets and support a martyr. It's a very different thing to go into the streets against the regime, against Mr. Putin, and risk the repression that is now bound to follow. So I think that once the shock and the mourning of Mr. Nemtsov's killing has worn off, the opposition is going to be deflated and in despair again, which is very sad. Well, the reaction from the Kremlin against this is going to be fairly obvious. There is going to be more repression, tightening of the screws. They will clamp down even harder on the internet. They will clamp down even harder on remaining voices that are critical of the Kremlin and of the regime. It is likely that, there was speculation that people like Mr. Navalny and Alexei Navalny and his brother, who have been recently sentenced on completely idiotic charges, that they might be pardoned, that Mr. Putin would use the anniversary of the victory over Nazi Germany, which is upcoming, as a day of reconciliation and to pardon a number of people and diffuse tensions in Russian society. Whether those speculations were valid or not is hard to say, but they're definitely off the table now. We're going to see several years now of tightening repression from the Kremlin, with a buildup of regime critique from within that is going to increase the pressure in the pressure cooker. But it's very difficult to see any explosion anytime soon, although the economy is turning sour and people's lives are getting more depressed. It is not likely that there will be any major blowout. What is really troubling, as I mentioned, is that if the hit against Mr. Nemtsov is a sign of disturbance within the ranks, that people may be going for Mr. Putin, then it is really dangerous. So let us hope that this was not the case.